We welcome Alan Tiller as our guest speaker tonight. Alan was born at the Hutchinson Hospital in Gawler and grew up on 21st Street. He was educated at Evanston Primary School, Gawler High School, and then TAFE SA, earning an advanced diploma of Library and Information Services. He also holds a diploma of Family History from University of Tasmania. Alan currently is studying Bachelor of Arts with honours at the University of Tasmania, majoring in History and minoring in Australian History. Alan has written 2 self-guided tours, one for the City of Port Adelaide Enfield Council and one for the City of Adelaide. He was an Australian star in the hit TV show Haunting Australia and has appeared on Today Tonight, Psychic TV, don't know that name, SA Life, and at the Russell Crowe movie, The Water Divine. He has been heard many times on Limestone Coast, Triple M, Casey Radio Victoria and Radio Adelaide. He holds a regular paranormal history talks at the City of Salisbury Library Service and the Barossa History Fair. Alan was also the recipient of the 2017 Emerging Historian of the Year, an award given to him by the History Council of South Australia. Alan works locally at Gawler Civic Center and the Everton Gardens Library. He is an executive member of the Adelaide Plains Historical Committee, and he is also an executive member of the Gawler History Team Incorporated. A busy young fellow. Please welcome Alan Tiller to address us on Ghostly Gawler. Just a sec. 1 second, please. Make sure my camera's right.
So thank you, Brian, and hello everyone, and thank you all for coming along tonight. I have a lot to cover and limited time. So first, let me say I am not here to convince you of the existence of ghosts. I am quite sceptical, and I'm sceptical of their existence and realise that many of the stories are anecdotal and personal stories. Sometimes people have very good explanations, or they have very good stories, but the things that are occurring to them... Oh, my microphone's just dropped off. The things that are occurring to them are actually natural occurrences that can be explained, and sometimes people don't realise that. So also ghost stories traditionally are allegories used to relate hidden dangers to children. And today they are often pop culture references. So whether you choose to believe in them or find them silly is entirely your choice. For me, I find them interesting as a historical subculture of humanity's superstitions, supernatural belief, and fear of death and unknowns of the other side. So, I'm not going to bore you too much with a long introduction, I'm going to get straight into it. And our first stop this evening is going to be in Gawler South. And if you could kindly turn the screen around for me. Thank you very much. Here we go. So our first ghost is on Ford Street, which is now First Street. So according to the memories of Gawler identity Trix McConnell, Gawler was overcome with ghost fever in 1916, when a ghost began haunting a young family on Ford Street. A young boy aged about 6 was the first to report the haunting. The next was a 13-year-old girl from the house next door. The young girl had run away to a neighbour's house after her father died, and her stepmother began treating her unfairly. Only when both children were in the house would strange things happen. It is claimed that stones clattered on the roof, lights flashed throughout the home, furniture moved of its own volition, and anyone who dared to sit on the boy's bed would be flung across the room. Rumours about the haunted house spread, and soon half of Gawler and the soldiers stationed at the Gawler racecourse were gathering outside the house to get a glance at the ghost. The local cop, old Rolly, was called to inspect the house. Rolly sat on the bed and was flung onto the floor. The police took the children away and the ghost became quiet. The police never resolved the incident, but it was thought the whole thing was a hoax until Rolly was thrown from the bed. And some of you might recognise this house down on First Street. It still stands today. So our next haunted location is Pioneer Park. So Pioneer Park was in the original town plan for Gawler, designed by Colonel William Light, with his first recorded burial being Ellen Fielding in 1847. The cemetery saw a steady influx of deaths over the next 20 years until it was deemed unfit for service because it was too close to the town centre. A year after opening in 1847, a visiting journalist stated of the cemetery, "The Gallertown Cemetery is still a disgrace to any civilised community. It not only is unfenced and thus at the mercy of pigs and every other description of intrusive beast, but drays and horsemen make a thoroughfare in precincts which even the untutored savage holds taboo." The intersection of Cowan Street with Murray Street was a small hill prior to 1870. It was eventually cut away to make the slope easier to navigate, which saw many burials along the western boundary of the cemetery being relocated to other areas within the grounds, and others were relocated to Williston Cemetery, which was opened in 1866 to replace the Gawler Cemetery. So this photo, you can see some of the headstones peeking over the stone wall just on the other side there. Obviously not there anymore. So many Gawler pioneer family members were buried in the cemetery, with 471 recorded burials in the short time it was used. And many of those burials are still present under the mound today. In 1933, the cemetery was declared parklands, and a dedication service was held in October 1936 in which the cemetery was renamed Pioneer Park. There have been reports of ghosts witnessed on the hill over the years, with one witness describing a man in old Victorian clothing standing on the hill looking out towards Cowan Street. And while the witness watched the man from across the road, the ghost faded away from sight. Has anybody seen that particular ghost? No? That's good. So across the road from the cemetery, on an angle, we have the Piles building at number 150 Murray Street. So this collection of shop fronts is collectively known as the Piles building, and James Pyle also built the impressive Oakland's house in Gawler East. These shops, from Tony Piccolo's office to just before Bean Music, included the Commercial Bank of South Australia and several other stores. During renovations in 2019 for the new tabletop warfare shop, several odd occurrences happened. Overnight, when no one was present, scaffolding used to paint and repair the walls and ceiling would move from where it was mounted against the wall to be discovered a long distance away from where it was originally erected. Tools would disappear only to be found in another room, and the sounds of disembodied footsteps and sometimes murmured voices could be heard during the evening with no discernible source. Now, they use that building at the moment to play games at night, and there are still things occurring to this day. This report came from 2019 when they renovated for the new shop, and as I said, things are still happening, and we will be looking into why very soon. So, just across the road is the Mckinley Monument. You all would know this one. So across the road from the Piles building stands the Mckinley Monument, erected in 1875. There is a legend of, on stormy nights, a ghostly, shadowy looking man dressed head to toe in black with a large black coat standing under the monument to keep dry. He's been seen since around the 1950s, only on very, very wet, rainy nights, never at any other time. So James Pyle's daughter, Jane, married John Mckinley, and they moved into the stately Oakland's house in Gawler East. Mckinley remained at Oakland's until his death on 31st of December 1872, aged 53 years old, and Jane remained there for another 42 years until she died in 1914. Oakland's house was divided in half, with one side accessed from McKinley Avenue and the other from Dawes Drive. It is said both John and Jane bought Oakland's house, with both being witnessed as full-bodied apparitions. So our next stop is Yenda. Yenda is found on Blanche Street, which was built between circa 1849 by Dr. David Mahoney, or Mahoney. So how do you pronounce that, Brian? Mahoney or Mahoney? It's Mahoney? Some people pronounce it Mahoney, some people pronounce it Mahoney. So the land was purchased from his father-in-law, John Reed. The couple named their extensive property Yenda, which is Ghana language meaning to walk. The doctor died in 1858 and left his wife and 2 daughters the property. The property was subdivided in 1873 and rented out to the Lewis family. The daughters of Dr. William Hull Lewis started a school on the property. On the 29th of May 1875, Anna Lewis, wife of solicitor William Rowe Lewis, died at Yenda. She was only 35. Only 2 days later, Dr. William Hull Lewis died at Yenda, aged 68. On the 2nd of October 1888, Ellen Mary Lewis, the daughter of Richard Moore Lewis, who was known to her family as Grace or Gracie, died from pneumonia at Yenda. Ellen, or Gracie as she is known, is the ghost said to haunt Yenda and the surrounding properties. Gracie has been witnessed by children as a full-bodied apparition. She has been heard laughing, crying and speaking. But Gracie may not be the only ghost. Anna Jones Lewis, the youngest daughter of W.R. Lewis, died at the home on 27th November 1900, and she too may haunt Yenda. So just near Yenda, sits Uke House at 12C Lindog Road. Uke was constructed on land previously part of Marnie's Paddock and Yenda. The land was bought at auction by farrier William Wilson Smith in 1874, and in 1875, Smith sold the land to the auctioneer who had sold it to him, Mr. John Wilkinson. Wilkinson is assumed to have built the house between 1875 and 1879. Wilkinson sold the property to Joseph Wilcox Jr. and William Rowe Lewis in June 1879. It was sold again 2 months later to John Frederick May, who was in business partnership with his brother Alfred at iconic Gawler business, the May Brothers. May leased the house to Edward Luca, who bought the property in May 1894. The property changed hands many more times before becoming the home and medical surgery of Dr. Gemma Wilson Tassie in the 1960s until 1971. And it is during this period that the alleged haunting began. A cleaner in the home in the 1980s noticed that after she made the bed, the mattress would compress as if someone had just sat down. She noted sweet fragrances in one bedroom, and every now and then things would move around. She would walk in, place her cleaning items on a table, and a few seconds later they would be on the other side of the room on a dresser. She never saw the spirits of the house, but claimed she felt that one room was haunted by a former doctor, another a former patient, and that another spirit was a youngish girl. So could that girl be Gracie or Anna from Yenda? So we're going to go back now to Murray Street and to the Exchange Hotel. So the Exchange Hotel was first licensed in 1868. On Saturday the 17th of May 1893, this hotel made national news after the suicide of R.F. Rankin. He had been wrongly prosecuted in Munter for defrauding a chemist of £14. Rankin came to Gawler intending to stay the weekend. Rankin was an intravenous cocaine and morphine user. On Saturday evening, Mrs. Lucas, the wife of the publican, heard some painful groans coming from Rankin's room. She alerted her husband, who tried but could not open the door. There on the bed, when they finally got through, was Rankin, and he was lying dead among syringes and tubes of cocaine. Dr. Dawes was called to examine Rankin, but it did not take long for him to realise it wasn't an overdose, but a case of poisoning. Found lying under the bed was a small bottle of prussic acid, which is also known as a solution of cyanide. It was used in fumigation and in mining, and the smallest amount can cause death instantly. Rankin had consumed about 15 millilitres of the liquid, and a jury concluded that most likely Rankin was delirious from the amount of cocaine and morphine he had consumed, and possibly drank the bottle of cyanide without realising what he was doing. His death was listed as an accidental suicide. It is claimed a female house guest died upstairs, and she is to blame for several of the ghostly goings-on inside the hotel. Scott Fraser, a former publican, has previously stated that lights will randomly turn on throughout the various levels of the hotel, but even more unsettling is the strong smell of death that permeates the rooms of the hotel. Fraser had exterminators in twice, thinking a possum had died in the ceiling. After inspection, no source for the smell could be found. In fact, the smell seemed to move from room to room and could sometimes be smelled in one corner of a room but not in another corner, as though an invisible wall was holding the smell in containment. The smell had been bad enough on some occasions to make people choke and gag. This hotel is also claimed to be haunted by the spirit of a little girl, and is not known whom she might be, but she's often seen sitting on a bed in an upstairs room. So our next stop is the Gawler Civic Center. So you might recognise this building. It looks a little bit different in this picture. Obviously the town hall's not been built there yet. So the Gawler Civic Centre today comprises the Gawler Town Hall and Gawler Institute, and both buildings are considered haunted. The Institute was built in 1870 on land donated by James Martin, and some people believe the Civic Centre to be haunted by two former librarians. One is Mrs. Hilda Heinrich. Hilda and her husband Herman came to Gawler in 1932 and worked at the Gawler Institute Library from 1955. Herman died in 1959, but Hilda stayed at the library's head librarian until 1985. Hilda sat in an elevated position in the library where she could oversee all goings-on. She is described as having a stern disposition and being generally feared, and I can hear most of you know exactly who I'm talking about. So there have long been reports that Hilda haunts the library and the reading room, with some witnesses claiming to see her from time to time and others claiming to feel her presence. One librarian once claimed that Hilda would interfere with electrical products in the building. I haven't seen her in my time, and I've been at the Civic Centre for almost 2 years as a librarian now, not encountered Hilda whatsoever. So another spirit thought to haunt the library building is James Beasley. Beasley was appointed the Institute Librarian in 1890, a position he held for 43 years. James was also a Freemason and the Secretary of the Gawler Institute. James, his wife, his children and his mother lived in the basement of the Institute and also had 2 rooms at the rear of the building where the youth centre stands today. So back in this day, you can't see it in this picture unfortunately, there used to be, where the youth centre is, a kind of wooden annex, and that was their only outdoor source of light other than the side. If you look along the side of the Institute, you can see basement windows which now go into our workroom. That was their entire living space. Today the Civic Centre is obviously much bigger downstairs with the cafe and everything as well. So you can imagine what it would have been like living in a basement for 43 years with your mother and your children. It wouldn't have been fun. So the interesting thing about James died at the age of 73 on Christmas Eve 1933. He died in the basement. Where he died is currently the workroom for the library staff, and the mantelpiece he died in front of still stands in that particular building today. So his ghost has allegedly been seen by countless staff, particularly upstairs in the library, but at the moment he is being seen in the basement yet again. Sometimes he is seen walking through the reading room on the ground floor. The most common thing that people see when they see this particular spirit is his hand up to about here, leaning on a mantelpiece in the basement. Unfortunately, it's not a space where you can get into in the library, it's a workroom only. So alongside the library, we have Gawler Town Hall. Currently, this building and the Institute are joined together and make our Civic Centre, and the Town Hall building is alleged to be haunted by a man named James Sparshot McLean. So at a Rechabite meeting for female members, James was taking subscriptions when he suddenly lurched forward. He had died in an upright position amongst the women. Staff reported feeling paranoid in these rooms, and many have reported murmuring voices from an unknown source. So before I came here tonight, I was actually at the library working the shift, and I went around and asked a few of the staff members things that have happened, and they told me when one of them used to have an office upstairs in the town hall, that, and this lady is not much of a believer in ghosts, but she used to freak herself out because she would hear weird noises and all that kind of stuff, and she always thought there was something going on up there. And when I told her about James Sparshot McLean, I kind of answered a few questions about other things she'd seen and heard up there. I've only had one incident in my time in the library that could possibly be paranormal, and that was in what we call the Ante Room, which is the little room that joins the library onto the reading room. And one night after closing, I locked up the library and I was the only person in there, and I heard a woman say my name very loudly in my left ear, and there was absolutely no one else in the building at all that particular time. I have no clue where that voice came from, but as many of you probably know, I'm a skeptic, but I don't actually have an answer for that particular incident. So our next stop is south of the Civic Center. Well, and that's James Sparshot McLean there. I can't actually see the buttons properly on the computer. There we go, there's his name. So this is our next stop. You probably all know this building very well. So currently the Gawler Flower Gallery, the former post office and telegraph office, which opened in 1867. It was purpose-built as an upgrade to the telegraph station post office next door, which is now the Gawler Museum. And up until 1940, the postmaster and his family lived inside this building. The post office moved from this building in 1973, and since then it has been used by all kinds of businesses, including the Gawler Tourism Centre for a while, and the office of local psychic Zoe McDonald. Staff of the Gawler Flower Wagon and of the businesses upstairs talk of a ghost named George roaming the building. He has been heard walking up the rickety stairs into the clock tower and through both the ground floor and the first floor. It is not known whom George may have been when alive, but plenty of staff report incidents of hearing George in the building. And just as a little bit of information on the side here, if you did a survey of hotels throughout South Australia, the most popular name for ghosts in hotels is George. I don't know why they choose that name, but George is the most common ghost name. So next to that building we have, obviously, a museum. So the National Trust Heritage Museum started out as Gawler's telegraph station and was built in 1860. Pre-internet and telephones, a wire signal was installed that would allow a tapped Morse code message to be sent to Gawler from Adelaide or Port Adelaide when the mail arrived. Eventually the post office moved next door, and this building became the Gawler School of Mines, and after that the Gawler Adult Education Centre. From 1915 until 1953 it was the Commonwealth Government Electoral Office. In 1966 the building was transferred to the National Trust and became Gawler's National Trust Museum. The building is alleged to be haunted by twin girls who sit on chairs on the upper level. A witness claims to have walked into the room and saw the little girls sitting there. They were sitting there talking to each other. They didn't seem to notice the living lady and vanished before her eyes as she stared at them in shock. So further south on Murray Street, we have what is currently Maximum Employment Building. So this is the former State Bank building, which opened on September 12, 1911 as the Savings Bank of South Australia. And it was comprised of the main bank, a strong room and a safe in the basement, and the manager's residence upstairs. You still good to go, Ryan?
Yep.
Yep.
Fine.
A former staff member told me of her experiences with the ghosts in this building. She claimed that one day she was working on the teller line and setting up the cash drawer. Only her and her manager were in the building at the time. While she was busy working, she noticed a blonde-haired woman walk by in the hallway, so she yelled out hello, thinking that she was a colleague who had blonde hair. The woman ignored her hello and kept walking. Half an hour later, the colleague walked into the bank through the front door and said hello. The witness asked her if she'd come in earlier, and she replied, "No, I just got here." So this spirit likes to cause mischief upstairs and seems to have a strong dislike for men. She has been known to scratch, push and hit men when they are alone upstairs. Now I'm going to go into something that's not to do with ghosts, but it's still considered paranormal. Has everyone heard of the terminology spontaneous human combustion? Yes? So this little section of the talk is a little bit grisly. There is no photos of the incident, so I've saved you from that shock because that's not pleasant, but I will be describing some things that aren't overly pleasant. And some of you will recognise this house straight away. So it's not all ghosts in Gawler. We have one possible case of spontaneous human combustion. Mrs. Nichols lived alone in a cottage on Finnis Street that she rented from Mary Broderick. Some of you may remember the building as Mrs. Broderick's tuck shop in the 1950s. Right. On the evening of the 29th of June 1883 at about 11 p.m, Mrs. Nichols was seen by her neighbour through the window, going about her nightly routine before bed. The next day, June 30th, a wet Saturday morning, a young man living at Churchill noticed smoke billowing from Mrs. Nichols' cottage across the street. He called out for a fire truck and set off across the street to rescue Mrs. Nichols. Before the firemen had arrived, the young man and other neighbours had kicked in the old lady's front door, but they were too late to save her. The Kapunda Herald reported, all that remained of the poor woman was 1 foot and her head, charred like a mallee stump, the rest of the body being completely burnt to ashes. The circumstances of Mrs. Nichols' death are consistent with those of a paranormal phenomenon called spontaneous human combustion. At the time of her death, SHC was not a thing. It did not exist as a theory in that era. But Mrs. Nichols' death is consistent with known conditions that are associated today with the phenomenon, which are, they are usually elderly females, they are usually alcoholics, the body is not burned spontaneously but lighted by a substance that has come into contact with it. The hands and feet usually escape being burned and fall off the corpse. The fire has caused very little damage to combustible things in contact with the body, and the combustion of the body has left residue of greasy and fetid ashes, very offensive in odour. Now, there was speculation at the time that she was smoking in bed, and this caused her bedclothes to ignite, thus burning her to death. Others believe that a candle she often had lit as she went to bed caused a fire on a nearby chair, and that then took hold of her bedding, burning her to death. Former Police Constable Doherty, in charge of the case at the time, said none of those theories were consistent with the scene in the cottage. The official outcome by a jury after the inquest held in Mrs. Nichols' death was the deceased was accidentally burnt to death, but there was no evidence to show how the fire originated. Nothing else in the house had burnt except for Mrs. Nichols. So the house that you see on the screen in the background there is still standing today. I've done a little bit further research on this story. I've been following this one for about 10 years now. The house has actually burnt down at least twice since then and has been rebuilt, so it's not really the same building that it was back in those days. It is a little bit different. So folks, our next stop is the Gawler Cinema. So prior to the cinema being built in 1989, there stood a small symmetrical cottage on this property, which is the one you can see on the screen. When John Thorpe submitted his plans to build the cinema, the Gawler Council of the day decided that the cottage must stay intact. If you look through the doors of the cinema, you'll see the stairs that were the original entry of the cottage. The serving window where they serve the alcohol from is the original front window of this home. It's this window right here. Obviously it's been cut in a different shape today. So the original building is still within the cinema. Also still within the cinema is a basement. And in that basement sits a freshwater well. And that well is still there today. So they say the cinema is haunted by the spirit of a little girl, and she has been seen in the basement. She has been seen in all the old rooms that were once the cottage, including both the men's and women's toilets, and it is believed she may have died in the house or possibly drowned in the well. No one knows who she is. Strangely enough, she is never seen in the actual cinemas themselves, but she is seen in that main part of the building. Considering they think she died in the 1890s, there is no actual record of her death, but I'm sure she enjoys all the free movies she can sit through. So just south of the cinema, we have Dead Man's Pass. You probably all know about this particular location. So known originally to the European colonists as the Parrot Pass, the crossing got its name after an exploration party returning from the Barossa Ranges came across an exhausted traveller, whom they offered respite to. Once stopped at the crossing, they checked on their new companion who had fallen asleep in the back of their dray, only to find him dead. Having no tools with which to dig a grave, they placed his body upright in a hollow tree and covered it as best they could with sticks and branches. Not long after, another travelling party happened across the gruesome site, and after taking samples of the gentleman's clothing, encased him within clay in the tree. The name Dead Man's Pass was adopted circa 1842 as the permanent name of the South Parrot River Ford in honour of the dead man found in the hollow coffin tree. In 1869, Gawler Council surveyed a new roadway at Dead Man's Pass. Council workers began constructing the new road and came upon a skull and bones. Examining further, they found an almost complete skeleton. The bones were taken to the office of James Martin and examined by Dr. Knott. Dr. Knott concluded that they were the bones of a very tall European man owing to the size of the thigh bones. It is thought the bones were those of the man buried at the base of the tree some 30 years prior. The unknown man's remains were interred in an unmarked grave in the newly formed Gallertown Cemetery, which we now know as Pioneer Park. So there are many stories of paranormal encounters at Dead Man's Pass. If one cares to visit a website called Ghost Village, you can read the story of a young man and his mate who were riding their bikes down First Street. They were going too fast, and one kept hearing a voice in his ear say, "Go right," indicating to turn right into Gawler Terrace. The boy didn't have much time to make a choice. If he swept left around the Dead Man's Pass bend, he would go into oncoming traffic. If he managed to turn right, he wouldn't make the turn. Going against his instincts, he turned right and ploughed straight into the curb, flying through the air and hitting a massive gum tree. And there he lay stunned. He looked up and saw two figures standing over him, a man and a woman. The man said, "You're lucky to be alive, lad." And the lady said, "Take heed, boy, you only get one chance like this." The boy's mate came over to see if he was okay. He was laying on the ground without a scratch on him. He asked his mate where the old people had gone. His mate replied that he hadn't seen anyone, but he had heard his friend talking to someone. He then said he had watched him fly through the air over 33 feet of gravel and then land almost softly on the big gum tree. And that's not the only ghost story from down there. People have recorded seeing a woman with a parasol and another gentleman down there as well. It's considered very, very haunted, and no one really knows why. But we are now going to go back to the main street. We're going to go to the Kingsman. So the Kingsman Hotel opened in 1851 as the Globe Inn. Its history is significant in the town of Gawler, as it is where the original Humbug Society was formed that would later give birth to the locally printed Bunyip newspaper in 1863. The hotel changed its name to Kingsford in 1958, taking the name from Stephen King's house at Kingsford, north of Gawler, the same homestead that was used in the TV show McLeod's Daughters. It is alleged that the hotel is haunted by at least two spirits, one female and one male. The female ghost is trapped in servitude and continues in spirit as a maid. She has been known to fold towels and has been seen cleaning windows and mirrors. A former chef who lived at the hotel, Andrew Potter, has said he used to hear the ghostly maid walking the halls at night. He could hear her steps on wooden floorboards even though carpet had been installed. He would open his door to find no one there. He also stated on several occasions he would hang his clothing in the closet and wake in the morning to find them neatly folded on the floor at the end of the bed. And I'm sure we'd all love a ghost that would do our chores for us. So one night Potter woke up and realised someone was standing inside his room in front of the window. He rolled over and got a good look at the man standing there and prepared to defend himself when the man disappeared. He described him as appearing like the silhouette of a cowboy, wearing riding pants, a coat and a cowboy-like hat. John Matt, who was the manager in 1998, reported that often after closing, particularly around 1:30 a.m, he and other staff would hear what he described as chains being dragged along a wooden floor. Matt also witnessed a woman wearing a large hat, tight bodice and full skirt. He saw her twice upstairs, but said he felt no feelings of dread that people usually associated with hauntings. Instead, he felt mainly reassuring feelings. Matt also spoke of hearing windows and doors opening and closing of their own volition upstairs. Matt also spoke of an eerie encounter his wife had in the hotel. She had gone to bed and fell into a deep sleep. She dreamed of a red car and of a man reading poetry. She awoke the next morning facing the window and could hear the voice of the man from her dream still. He was still reading poetry, but he was sitting right behind her, but he wasn't reflected in the window pane. Terrified, she turned over to find no one there. When she later told her story to her husband, she could not remember the words of the poem, but knew it was about a young son who had died.
The Criterion Hotel was the third hotel in Bassetttown to be founded, and currently the only one still operating. The Railway Family Hotel was built in 1857, now for sale, and on 21st Street, the engine and driver was built in 1858, now private residence. The Criterion opened in 1864 with its first licensee being Elizabeth Bassett, widow to Bassetttown founder William Bassett. It is alleged that the hotel is haunted by the spirit of a little girl who died after falling down the internal staircase.
So our next location is probably the most famous house here in Gawler, the Parrot Mansion. You're probably all very much aware of this building. So Parrot was built by Walter Duffield, who was a pastoralist and politician who arrived in South Australia in 1839. He moved to Gawler in 1847 and bought the Victoria Steam Flour Mill. In 1851 he bought large sections of Gawler from the Gawler Special Survey and established his Parrot estate. Duffield was told by his family doctor to resign from public office in 1860, and he withdrew from all public activities and disposed of all his pastoral leases. He died at Parrot on 5th of November 1882, aged 66, and is buried at the Donaldson Cemetery. Most of his estate, valued at £117,000, was sold and placed in trust for his children and their descendants. According to Derek Whitelock's Gawler book, Parrot contains from 400 to 500 acres. Facing the house is a grassy flat, with highland on the southern side and a fringe of trees on the northern and northwestern sides. The vineyard, shrubberies, orchard and pleasure grounds, which are second on in the colonies, extend over about 14 acres. The Duke of Edinburgh twice visited Parrot. In 1867 he made an unscheduled stop there for refreshments when visiting Kapunda and Gawler. 2 years later he accepted a more formal invitation to lunch. Walter's wife, Phoebe, lived in the house until her death on the 15th of May 1890. Walter and Phoebe's son David then had occupation rights. Until his death in 1922, David rented the property out. A piano teacher named Mr. Lewis had it for a short while. Then it was a school for young ladies run by the Knott sisters. The house fell to David's children Walter and Kenneth and was sold by auction in 1923, with only 12 of 32 blocks selling. In December 1923, Henry Woodcock bought the property, and Woodcock died in 1924, but the house remained in his estate until 1940. It was during this time the house was rented and fell into disrepair. In the 1940s, tenders were called for the property's demolition, and a local telephone mechanic named Gerlin Cork and his wife Elizabeth Edith Cork purchased Parrot for £550. In 1965, Parrot became the property of publisher Frank Cork. In 1992, Cork sold the property to Paul and Joanne Westerman for $475,000. The Hosking family are the current owners, and they state that nothing paranormal has ever happened in the home since they have lived there. There are 22 rooms inside this house, with a circular ballroom and a curved cedar staircase, which is where the alleged ghost is seen most often. Parrot is often listed on the most haunted buildings in South Australia lists. It is believed that a woman fell in love with one of the young masters of the house and committed suicide by throwing herself down the stairs. Newspaper articles from the 1930s tell stories of a ghost that floats up and down the staircase of the house. However, there is no verification of this event ever happening, which means this haunting at this point in time falls into the realm of an urban legend, with little to no truth in the alleged haunting. Our next stop is the Bunyip office in Murray Street. So the Bunyip newspaper began its existence in 1863 as a monthly pamphlet published in collaboration with the Humbug Society. Editor Dr. George Knott and printer William Barnett teamed together to create what was to become South Australia's longest running family-owned newspaper. And when the paper began, it was a satirical look on life around Gawler, but later it was to become a weekly orthodox style newspaper, still with a strong community focus. The Bunyip newspaper in its early life was situated in a shop near the Baptist Church in Murray Street, Gawler, and later it moved further along the street to be situated near the Prince Albert Hotel. But after those premises were destroyed by a fire, it was relocated to its present location, of which it has remained since 1885. So my wife Karen and I were lucky enough to be invited by the newspaper's general manager, Margaret, to investigate the Bunyip office and printing area. We had a tour of the location, including the cellar. This is me going down into the cellar. This was 8 years ago. So, and I will show you the next photo first. That is not what paranormal people call orbs, which some people think are ghosts. This is purely dust. We are in a cellar that has a dirt floor, and like I said, it is purely dust, it's not ghosts, so don't be afraid of that. So the Bunyip basement contains a lot of old printing tools from the beginning of 1900s, which is what all of these are. So on here is letters, all that kind of stuff that you would have hand pushed it into the paper in the day, and I believe it's still there. I don't think it's ever been pulled out. So most of the paranormal phenomena reported to us seem to be taking place upstairs in the offices. We headed upstairs and recorded EVPs, which is an acronym for electronic voice phenomena, which is the belief that if you record questions, if you ask a question while your voice recorder's on and you leave a gap for the ghost to reply, that every now and again spirits will reply. It's a tried and true method that's been around since the 1930s and was first discovered by a man named Frederick Jurgensen in Sweden. So we went upstairs, and while we were up there, we heard a couple of loud knocks during our EVP session. The loud knocks did not appear on any of our audio recordings. In their place, however, was the low-pitched sound of a dog barking, which no one at the time heard. And being a skeptic, we would rule that out as possibly a dog outside and not a dog in there in ghost form. So the other active area was a downstairs office, where chairs moved by themselves and the sounds of someone sitting at a desk writing have been heard numerous times. This is another shot of the basement. Perhaps the most intriguing is the sound of someone walking up the staircase in the centre of the building when there is no one present on the staircase. So we ruled out the expansion and settling of the wood and building and set about conducting several experiments to try and recreate the recorded sounds, but we had no success in recreating them. It would seem the ghost that is responsible for the noise has some large heavy boots and really wants to be heard. It is quite significantly loud from reports that we had. And the other main thing that happens in another back section where the reporters sit is they feel very much paranoid, but that particular room has no windows. So our next stop, and I am just going to preface this and say this is a private residence. I'm a friend of the person who lives there and they have given me permission to talk about this building. Please do not go and knock on their door and ask to see the ghost. Please do not go to their house and take photos through the window. As you're going to see very soon, the gentleman who lives there is about this tall and about this wide, and he can pick you up and throw you across the road with one hand if you annoy him, so please don't annoy him. So this building was erected in 1910, and it opened on October 3rd, 1910. And it was a convent, the Good Samaritan convent. And the first nuns moved in on the 11th of November 1910. The building was designed by architects Woods and Baggett and built by Ligerwood and Park. It served as a school for Sisters of the Good Samaritan and could house 12 girl boarders. Park students speak of the honour of polishing the cedar staircase and chapel or ringing the Angelus bell all of which still stands intact today. So that's the staircase today. So music was a large part of instruction in the convent, with many important musicians being classically trained here before going on to better things, including internationally renowned musician Brenton Langbein, who unfortunately is not on the Gawler History Team website, this gentleman. And we will rectify that soon. So Mr. Langbein went on to study at the University of Adelaide, and he would later play with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and become a star of classical music scene in Europe. He was honoured with an OAM, and a theatre in the Barossa is named after him. So he was educated right here in Gawler. In 1973, the convent and the smaller convent next door was sold to Christos and Mavis Zisimu, who for a while turned the building into a boarding house for several years. The properties are still owned by the Zisimu family. And as I said earlier, the nuns promoted music, and it is an interesting bit of synchronicity that the Zisimu boys would be musicians who, if not for a tragic car accident, were on the brink of international superstardom. John and Anthony Zisimu founded the band Extreme, with John becoming internationally famous under his stage name John the Beast. John died in 2017 from complications caused by the car accident way back in 1986. In 2019, Anthony Zisimu, the co-founder of the band, who lived in the convent with his brother John, got in touch with my wife and we discussed some of the paranormal events that he has experienced on the property. These range from seeing his mother in a hallway, waking in the middle of the night to see a nun standing at the end of his bed staring at him, hearing a choir singing hymns in the chapel in the middle of the night. Upstairs is a full chapel that is still intact with the stained glass windows, and they often hear the voice of people singing hymns and praying coming from this particular room, which is where Anthony's office is. And Anthony, as I said, is a very large man, very scary looking man, but even he's too scared to go in there at night where his office is now, so he's moved his office downstairs. So it freaks him out too much. I'm sorry, Anthony, if you watch this video and I mention all this, sorry. So the house is considered very, very haunted, and I've just lost my spot, there we go. So no one will stay in certain rooms because of the oppressive feelings they get and the paranoia that they experience in there. And most recently, and I only contacted Anthony about 2 weeks ago when I told him I was going to be doing this talk, he said that he opened the front portico out towards the driveway, and a little boy was standing just in front of Anthony's car, and the little boy ran away, and as Anthony was watching him, the little boy vanished before his eyes, so he was not a living person. So on our first night, Karen and I visited the property, we noted extraordinary smells emanating from the hallway outside John's former bedroom, which is this room here. A very large shadow person was also noted in the hallway. Unfortunately, I can't tell you everything that happened that night, because we still are investigating, but this is all going to eventually come out in a future book about Ghosts of Gawler. Suffice to say that Anthony believes his brother is now haunting the building, and he has been seen by multiple people in there and has been heard, and his ashes are in that building, and he has lived there since, well, they moved there in 1973 as young boys, so it's the only house he's ever lived in his life other than the house before this one. So it's interesting that he is still actually around. So we're going to quickly leave Gawler. We're not going to go too far. We're going to go out to Turretfield, and we're going to visit Holland House. And some of you will know, if you were at my talk on the Barossa History Fair, what this story is leading to. So Henry Dundas Murray established a farm and a boiling down works at Turretfield in 1839. Murray returned to Scotland, appointing a manager to watch over the farm, not returning for another 7 years. In 1854, Murray, who was leaving the South Australian colony for New Zealand, sold the farm to Richard Holland. Holland was the son of convicts sent to Australia on the First Fleet. He worked as a stockman. His marriage to the wealthy widow Margaret Robertson secured him enough money and leverage to buy Turretfield and to work as a pastoralist, from which he and Margaret became very wealthy. And Margaret was previously an owner of the Bushman Hotel. In 1854, Holland House was built for Richard Holland, an ornate and castellated mansion. The house was designed by James McGeorge. Richard Holland lived in the house with his wife Margaret, who had previously been married and had 3 sons, and Holland took those sons on his own. Richard Holland died on the 25th of November 1881. It was his final wish to be buried in a specially built crypt under the stairs of the mansion. Holland was buried in a specially designed coffin. His body was inside a highly polished cedar coffin. This coffin was then put into a lead coffin, which was then placed in a cedar shell coffin. The burial crypt was under the stone stairs of the conservatory. On the day of his interment, 150 people attended the ceremony. Afterwards, the crypt was sealed. Holland's body was taken from the vault only a few short weeks later. Rumours abounded that Holland's body had to be removed because the smell of his corpse overcame the mansion. But the truth was that the house had to be sold as per Holland's last will testament. His remains were interred in St George's Cemetery in Gawler. Workers at the Turrafield Research Centre that occupies the house today have reported filing cabinets and cupboards opening of their own volition, chillingly cold breezes filling rooms on hot days, and bookcases having their contents strewn across the room. The ghost is also known to cause havoc with computers and other modern equipment, often shutting down electronics or making them act in peculiar ways. Children have seen this apparition, with one child stating, after seeing a painting of Mr. Holland on the walls of the house, "That is the man that tucked me into bed last night." Now, ladies and gentlemen, would you not be scared to death seeing this man in your bedroom at night about to tuck you in? He is not a pleasant looking. Can we just go back one area? I can't. That just skipped forward, sorry. I want you to have a good look at him. There we go. So imagine him staring down at you while you're laying in bed. I'm sure you'd have nightmares. So one more story for this evening, and then I imagine we'll have a bit of a Q&A session, Brian? Yes? So our last location for this evening is the Golden Fleece Hotel, which opened on the 30th of October 1839. It originally consisted of a one-room hut and bedroom and was not much more than a tent, but it is considered Gawler's very first building. The building of the hotel was financed by John Reed. A rear room was once Gawler's first morgue until the local undertakers built facilities in the 1870s. Henry Carlton, publican from 1842 until 1850, set up a post office in the hotel. Carlton is also credited with offering funeral services from the hotel and officiated at burials. The original publican, David Schneibner, was imprisoned in the Adelaide jail for owing money to Francis Dutton. He claimed insolvency and then the hotel was sold on to its next proprietor. Charles Donaldson died in the hotel on 18 September 1868. Charles was the second surviving son of Two Wells publican James Donaldson. Charles was 35 at the time of his death. The James family were proprietors of the Old Spot Hotel from 1879 until 1891. And in 1891, on the 3rd of January, tragedy struck the family when the infant son of Richard and Jan James passed away at just 10 years old in the parents' bedroom in the hotel. This was the second tragedy to hit the young family, with their eldest daughter, Alice Mary, aged 1 and 11 months, also passing at the hotel on the 3rd of September 1880. The final tragedy for the James family occurred on the 6th of March 1890 when Jane, wife of Richard, passed away in the hotel at the age of 43. Joseph Cundy of Williamstown died inside the hotel on Sunday the 17th of February 1884. Cundy had been passing through the town with a load of posts to be taken out towards Lyndoch when the wheel of his cart was smashed going over the train line in Gawler. He borrowed another cart while his was getting fixed. He returned to Gawler on Friday evening, staying at the Old Spot. He went to bed at about 6 p.m. on Sunday evening. At 10:30 p.m. that evening, publican Mr. James went to see if Cundy needed anything and found him dead. Cundy was 65 years old. On the 8th of January 1904, Patrick Flanagan, publican, passed away inside the hotel. He was aged 51. The spirit of a little girl is often seen at the base of the Old Spot Hotel's interior staircase. Other ghosts were once blamed for ringing the hotel's interior doorbells at odd hours during the night. Spectral footsteps have been heard on the staircase, and phantoms have been seen and felt in the modern car park behind the building. It is believed by some locals that this is where the former morgue once sat. Another spirit, and perhaps another of the ghosts on the stairs, is thought to be an old lady. This spirit is only ever seen upstairs and is described as a short, thin, pale woman who looks ill. The most notable of all ghost stories associated with the pub occurred in 1993. Scott Pearson, a professional photographer, took a photo in the hotel that showed 3 distinct images thought to be spirits that were haunting the hotel. This is the photo. So the hotel had just had renovations completed, and several patrons and staff had started to see apparitions of a small girl and an older gentleman. Unexplainable noises were being heard, whispers, disembodied voices, and other strange phenomena. Okay, so this photo is obviously not the clearest photo you've ever seen, but this next photo is an enhanced version of this. A little bit clearer. So you can see up here is a man's face, in the middle is a child's face, and this is a child's face, and this is a foot. This very photo used to hang up in the hallway of the old Spot Hotel before it became the Golden Fleece for probably close to 2 decades. I don't know where the photo is today, it has disappeared. But it's probably the most famous ghost photo out of Australia. You'll find this photo in multiple paranormal books. It's still talked about today as one of the most genuine ghost photos taken in the world. So if you've been paying attention tonight, you'll note that I have not mentioned in tonight's talk a number of other ghost stories, purely because I knew I wouldn't have time. So these are some of 3 of the other places that I could have talked about. The Weak Sheep Inn, haunted by a woman who appears in black. Fotheringham's house on 8th Street, which is not in this particular photo. That house, a person committed suicide and has been witnessed in the basement. The former premises of Taylor and Forgie on Todd Street is also considered haunted. The Railway Family Hotel, the Williston Cemetery, St George's Cemetery, Martindale and Treeview are all considered haunted. Today, prior to coming here, I heard about another 20 other places in the main street that are haunted. But I figured I would have to hold back a few because I've already been talking for over an hour and we don't want to keep you up all night. So I thought I'd hold back a few in the hope that maybe I might come back at another time and continue another story with a whole heap more ghost stories. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope I haven't scared you too much, and thank you for listening and good night.
There must be a question or 3. Questions?
Karen,
Yep.
got a question.
Not actually a question, I'm sorry, did I have the correct? You said Anthony's band name is History, it's Escape.
Oh, sorry, so correction.
Put yourself on.
Yes, Anthony's band's name was Escape, not Extreme. Extreme's a different heavy metal band.
It was
So
actually on the...
it was? Yeah, that was a typo, sorry.
Okay. Questions? Comments? Yes. David.
Anything on the Gawler Arms Hotel?
Gawler Arms Hotel, anything on that?
I have heard it's haunted, but I don't really have any stories about it.
You want one?
I would love one.
Okay.
Back in the late 60s, I worked with Harold Moore, the hairdresser in Gawler, and it was almost a throwaway line, or a throwaway sentence, if you like. He said that one day a guy came to him to get his cutthroat razor honed, strapped, and that was what people did back in those days, they shaved with them. And when he came to pick it up, he said, is it sharp? You sure it's sharp? He said, yes it is. And that's all I know. So this is 50 years ago. And it just sit in the back of my mind, and for whatever reason, I couldn't do anything about it until Trove came along. And I decided to look at Trove one day. There was nothing about it in the bunyip, but I did find a story in the Advertiser. This guy went back to the Gawler Arms, locked himself in the bathroom, leant over the bath and cut his throat. And his name was Johannes Edward Modra. There was a border there, but his folks came from Shiobog, and he was 56 and single. Thank goodness for Trove, you can actually uncover some of these things all these years later, and I've come to full circle now, so there you are, Johannes, or Johnny, Edward Modra.
Thank you. I use Trove extensively for my research, and another ghost story which I didn't talk about tonight. You've probably all heard of Spring-Heeled Stephen or Spring-Heeled Jack in the UK, who went around bouncing from roof to roof. Gawler had its own version called Spring-Heeled Stephen, and he was seen running along the roof space from where the bunyip is south to the bank, and then he went across to the old Spot Hotel at the time, and was seen at all the windows. People tried to shoot him and all kinds of stuff, and then he just magically disappeared and was never heard of again. He was also seen out at Kapunda, Peterborough, and up in the Adelaide Hills at Woodside, so that ghost got around.
More questions? Comments?
They're all too scared.
They're all too scared.
Okay.
I will now have great pleasure in asking Paul to give the vote of thanks and the thing that's around the back. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Very impressive CV tonight. Quite impressed. And obviously a very important topic, and by the numbers that turned up tonight, I think Brian said that's the second highest number we've had. Obviously people have come and flocked from near and far, and hopefully all had a really good night, because I know I have. I've learned two things tonight. It's very important. One is that I and all the blokes in this room are not likely to spontaneously combust, which is really, really good. And the second one is I've been to most of the hotels that were listed tonight, and after 10 pints I have heard and seen things as well. But on a serious note, it has been a really good night, and I expect everybody has enjoyed themselves. If you haven't, you shouldn't be here. And hopefully we can get Alan back again. So I'd like you to put your hands together, not just for tonight, but also to get him back again. Thank you. And we have some goodies which are behind the curtain. It's as old you can get. There you go.
Thank you very much.
So thanks again for a great night. Okay, cheers.